So you might notice that there's a face that's on the screen that's not on the table. There was a change of plans, but I'm going to have everyone go down and introduce themselves. My name is Benjamin Teitz. I am a registered psychological associate here in California. I work in clinical and forensic psychology, and I am the co-host of a podcast called Mental Health Quest, where we talk about mental health and understanding what it is and how do you get help and how do you support yourself and other people. And we're going to just go down the table.
Let's give him a round of applause for being here. Hello, LA Con. I'm Dr. Scott Jordan, a.k.a. Zombie Scotty, cognitive psychologist, philosopher at Illinois State University, coming to you today as Josephus Miller from The Expanse. So I'll take all proto-molecule questions as you have them. I also run a channel on YouTube called Dark Loops Productions, where we do exactly this sort of thing. So glad to be here.
Hi everyone, I am Dr. Janina Scarlett. I'm a clinical psychologist, author, and a full-time geek. And I specialize in incorporating pop culture, so Star Wars, Star Trek, Avengers, etc., into mental health treatment to help folks recover from post-traumatic stress disorder.
Hi, my name is Allie Smith. This is actually my first panel, so very excited to be here. And I'm Boo. So apparently they're roasting Pixar characters in the next room. So if you see anybody coming out of that room, we're going to give them dirty looks. But very excited to be here. I'm a mental health aficionado and self-proclaimed geek.
My name's Dr. Isaac Teitz. You may recognize a name and face similarity. I'm actually brothers with Benjamin Teitz. And I am a clinical psychologist. I am the head of All Mind Health. It's a psychology clinic for anxiety, OCD, insomnia, for children, adults, basically kids of all ages.
So I'm going to assume you guys are all here because you hate Star Wars.
Yeah!
All right, we're just going to start with something really awesome, which is the Jedi and Sith codes, and also the Grey Jedi code. So Star Wars, for me, kind of mentions a lot of topics that relate to mental health, particularly mindfulness. And I wanted to kind of have everyone give a chance to kind of talk about how they view the concept of mindfulness or mental health related topics, specifically from the codes, because we see on the screen that there's kind of three different ways of looking at things. We have one that's like, no, there's no emotion. We have to be completely logical and stay away from emotion. That's what the Jedi were teaching Anakin, and as we know, that didn't end well. But the Sith were like, oh, all emotion, no logic. Yeah, let's just do that. And that didn't end well for them either. So how do we find a balance of that? And I'm actually going to ask Dr. Scarlett to start us off to talk about mindfulness, what we can learn about mindfulness from the Jedi and Sith.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm honored. So essentially, mindfulness is the Force. So mindfulness is noticing what's going on both in our environment and also in our bodies. What's happening with, let's say, our heart beating a little bit faster when we see somebody we like or maybe somebody we don't like. What's happening with our stomach when maybe we see a food that is appetizing or maybe a food we don't like so much. When we're connecting with the Force, that is when we are truly in our power. And this is why, for any of you who are familiar with Clone Wars, in the middle of a battle scene, Yoda stops and he practices mindfulness to connect with the Force because it is taking that time to really figure out our options that allows us to be not only most present, but also to make the best decisions possible.
Isaac, what do you have to say about mindfulness, Jedi, Sith? All that jazz?
All this Star Wars stuff, I don't know what's so exciting about it. All right, so that aside, the aspect of mindfulness that I find most important from Star Wars itself, from our own path through finding our ability to engage, is the ability to be present, to be aware of whichever senses we want to engage in. But even more so when we're doing any exercises of mindful breathing, mindful eating, mindful walking. The mindfulness part is actually noticing when you're off track and then resetting. It is the very awareness when you're off. And when you catch it, that's your victory. And so just like when Yoda was able to notice, hold on, getting a little too dark-sided here, and resetting, that is the mindfulness. When we notice that we're not doing too great, when we're off, that's a victory. Well done. And now you are one step closer towards being the version of you that you want to be.
Allie?
Well, I think when I was younger, I felt like the emotion clouded a lot of things for me. And I remember watching the movies when I was younger and being like, oh, Anakin he doesn't always talk to you about, and his ability to, what's the word, I guess, get clouded. You thought, oh, he's just like super angry. But I would say now that I'm older, I'm like, you understand where his abilities come from and the mindfulness that it really takes to channel those inner emotions. So that's what it means to me.
Thank you. Scott?
Sure. For me, mindfulness, consciousness itself is a continuum. So when you're looking for your keys, anybody look for their keys in the last week? Okay, your whole brain is organized around looking for keys, all right? When you start to meditate, what you're trying to do is allow yourself to be more open and less focused on the current context around you. And actually, ironically, by doing so, you become more aware of the things around you because your brain is open to it. Because most of the time we're we're busy focusing. I've got to pick up the kids, I've got to go to the store, and all of those things require the brain to be focused. One final thing, people who are expert meditators are actually putting their brains in similar states of those who are on LSD. And what LSD does is actually disinhibit the large amount of inhibition that usually exists in your brain so that you can focus. Okay, so people that are on LSD can taste colors, they can smell sounds, because areas of the brain that usually are inhibited from communicating with each other are. So for me, the Force is sort of a continuum, and we find our place within it as a function of focusing versus being mindful versus being completely open to the universe, I guess.
The Force is a continuum, as we see in Star Wars. It's not just light and dark. There's also, some balance in between. Is what the whole point of Anakin being the chosen one is that he was supposed to bring balance to the Force. But what does balance in the Force mean? And I really like that here is in the Gray Jedi Code, which is the one in the middle, is saying there's no light without the dark. There's no passion. Through your passion, you also can be bound with patience. So they don't always have to be opposite. And there's a type of therapy practice called dialectical behavioral therapy, or DBT. For any of you who have just watched She-Hulk, it was mentioned there. It is a real thing, and it is really helpful for people who struggle with emotional regulation, like Anakin, really. His emotions got too strong. But we don't need to get rid of the emotions, just like we don't need to get rid of all logic. We need to find a way to use both of them to support each other and complement each other. And so personally, I like to think of the Force as really the Grey Jedi have it right, whereas the Jedi and the Sith are kind of too stuck in their own ways. But I think it is possible to find that balance in each of us. We all have light and dark inside of us. So in Star Wars, there's this character called Bendu who really embodies that mindfulness aspect and that being in the present moment. And I thought that was a perfect embodiment of the Grey Jedi Code and what we just talked about. But Isaac, do you have anything further to say about Bendu?
Well, yes, I do. I should have said, well, yes, I Bendu. Who here watched the Star Wars Rebels? Good, you're in the right place. So we meet Bendu in this remote planet, this very kind of barren desert with these weird, spooky, spidery guys hanging out all over the place. Objectively, not a very, hospitable location. However, he is one with the location. He is one with the Force in a way that we don't really get to see any of the Jedi or the Sith really engaging. And he describes his maintenance of just being present with what is happening, not trying, not forcing the situation. In Buddhism, there's this concept where desire breeds dissatisfaction, or dukkha, which makes some sense. If you want for something, I want to, grab a hot dog. You try to stand in line over there, you're going to be disappointed one way or another, whether you get the hot dog and it tastes cold or bad, or whether you've been waiting in line for too long and then run out and you're going to get dissatisfied anyways. Even if it's the best thing you've ever had, eventually you will get disappointed again, whether it's the indigestion or just the next thing that comes down the line. So Bendu illustrates how necessary it is not to try to force the issue. Whatever ends up happening is what ends up happening, but to be yourself in every moment. So, for any Jedi in the audience that are thinking of how to deal with something stressful that's going on, if you stop fighting it, like Scott was pointing out, if you stop trying to focus too hard to get to some objective, and you allow yourself to relax and open up, you get to see more opportunities. Neurologically speaking, when we are anxious, when we are stressed, when we are trying too much, we activate our sympathetic nervous system, which is ironic because there's not a lot of sympathy there, but that's our fight or flight response. However, when we relax, when we breathe, when we take a beat, we activate our parasympathetic nervous system. That's our rest and digest or broaden and build. You get to see more options available, you get to think more creatively. So Bendu here allows or shows the audience that there is another way. You do not have to be entirely stoic and emotionless, and you do not need to be entirely vicious and controlling. You can just be chill.
So do or do not, but don't try? Like, there's no try?
Ben do or Ben do not.
Going on with the whole mindfulness and being aware of our emotions, I think this quote from Yoda is really prescient there, is because here we see a progression from one emotion to another and how they influence each other. Personally, I work with offenders, people who are coming out of prison. And these are kind of emotions that they feel a lot of: fear, anger, hatred. But they don't always understand how they relate to each other, and especially fear. First of all, how many of you guys have ever felt angry? Oh, so not a lot of you. Good. Okay. But anger is a secondary emotion. It's covering up something that is more kind of needed to be recognized. And a lot of time it's fear and hurt. So I was wondering, Dr. Scarlett, can you talk a little bit about how fear and trauma and pain kind of lead us down this path of anger and cycling into that?
Yeah. Thank you. Honestly, I have a saying, which is that feelings are meant to be felt. That's why they're called feelings. All feelings are there for a reason. Feelings are information. Maybe I'm sounding like a Sith, but that's fine. All feelings that we have are telling us what's happening and what our needs are. We feel fear because there's something that's indicating that either our lives or maybe something that's really important to us might be in danger, and then we take action. We feel angry when either somebody impinges on our rights or the rights of other people, and so that anger can actually propel us to action. So every emotion that we experience can be very helpful in terms of letting us know what we need. If we're able to take our time and think about what the emotion is trying to tell us, we can take a really wise action, something that Anakin really needed to learn, and something that I think the Jedi failed to teach him. For many of us who go through something painful, something traumatic, those emotions might be heightened. And so sometimes we might experience very high amount of fear or a high amount of anger that might feel as if it is disproportional to what's going on in our environment. When actually what's happening is we might have some kind of an unmet need. And that unmet need might be a need for safety, reassurance, belonging, something, once again, Anakin didn't have and the Jedi failed to provide him. So I think the bottom line here is that just as logic is necessary, emotions are necessary too, and it is that balance that creates ultimate wisdom that allows us to make the best choices possible.
The areas of our mind that are in charge of emotion were the more prehistoric sections. The amygdala, the cerebral cortex is later on. It's evolved, the gray matter, and our ability to think about these situations became necessary or became more useful for us. But originally, like many creatures that exist in the world and in the Star Wars world as well, we dealt on emotion. If we were hungry, we ate. If we were tired, we slept. If we were angry or if we were scared, if we were, upset, we fought. It served a purpose, and so we still have these structures in our mind. It's necessary. It still helps us out. Yes, we have the cerebral cortex. We have this kind of electronic car on top of a Model T Ford. And so to be mindful and aware of what's coming up, to not be driven by emotions directly, but to be somewhat in the driver's seat. Unless you're in a Tesla, and then it's just a big battle the whole way through. So to be mindful means to allow whatever to come up, to come up. If ever any patients are dealing with anxiety, to notice the fear and then to sit with it. And by sitting with it and no longer running away from it, it gets bored. Just like the way everybody here forgot about that sensation of the chair underneath you until I just pointed it out. That's called habituation. And so by not letting our emotions completely drive us, we get to see what happens when we let them play out without getting too involved, without getting too engaged, until we choose to.
Could I add that if fear is an emotion that tends to lead to what we would call avoidance responses, meaning that we withdraw from the thing that we're fear of. When that turns into anger, it can lead to action, exactly as you said, and it's a very focused type of action. It's not open action, right? It's focused, destructive action. When we act out of joy, it's a bit more of an open action. We're still acting on the world, but we don't have that focus of destruction. We have a more open view of what might happen next. And I'm sure you all had that experience. When you're with your friends and you're having a ton of fun, you're up for anything. But when you're mad and you're going after something, you have a very clear goal and it's usually destructive.
I have to disagree with you there.
Mm-hmm.
Respectfully.
Good thing we don't have lightsabers.
I think that it depends on the type of action that we take. I think that many people tend to confuse anger for aggression, and I think they're not the same thing. The emotion of anger can make us aggressive, but it can also make us wonder about what's really important to us. When we see somebody that we care about getting bullied or being discriminated against, we're going to feel angry, and that's good, because we're going to feel angry because we care, and we might take a thoughtful action, such as standing up for that person and also protecting the person that we care about. So I think it's not that taking action out of anger is bad. I think it depends on the type of action that we take.
So we need to listen to the anger, use our emotions, don't let your emotions use you.
Yes.
I like that. It's difficult. It is very difficult, but I think we all have the ability to do that. We all can master that element of ourselves because we're all one with the Force and the Force is with us, right? Grief is another big topic that comes up in Star Wars a lot, especially with Anakin. He is just torn with a lot of grief. If anyone does not know the story of Anakin, I'm going to say some spoilers, so I'm really sorry. But he was born into slavery, and then he was rescued, and that was nice. Then his mom died. Like after she was freed, she was then kidnapped by Tusken Raiders, and he just went through a lot of trauma after trauma, and he never really got to process that. This is the commonly accepted format of grief. There's different stages, but as a lot of mental health professionals know, it's not very accurate. I want to ask our panelists, how do they feel Anakin's journey through grief and his trauma, how his journey of it can teach us about really what we shouldn't do if we're trying to process our emotions on our own, if we don't have that support from Jedi Masters or anything like that.
I'm going to tie this together with the concept that Anakin and most of the younglings, their whole experience of being indoctrinated into the Jedi culture is itself a emotionless one. They are brought in because they have this potential. We all have potential to do something great, to be great. But then the Jedi, to some degree, try to just cultivate the greatness, just what they're seeking. But there's a connection that's missing. And that's their whole concept, is to be devoid of connection, to have no attachments. And that's great if you recognize this and you choose to do so, you cultivate this, and you have a choice to do otherwise. But for many of these younglings, this is the only opportunity that they have for roof over their heads and to be free from quick drawing lightsaber fights and blaster battles. So it itself can also be a traumatic experience, just to be kind of chugging along and doing what you can to be successful, only with your mind, only to be you know, intelligent and logical. So, for Anakin in particular, he's what happens when the emotions are not addressed. If a parent is trying to logically talk to their kid and explain to them the situation that's going on, and why can't you just understand what I'm trying to say? It's a little kid. As I mentioned before, we operate emotionally initially, and to connect on the emotional side is the best way to resonate with one's children, to resonate with one's peers, to resonate with each other, to connect on an emotional level. If that cannot be made, if there is not a synchronicity, then there will be anger. There will be a dissatisfaction. And as Anakin shows us, if we stay with anger for too long, if we do not try to manage ourselves, but use this upset towards that singular focus, we're very easily manipulated. If you're if you're noticing that people are drawing on your anger and pressing it and making you feel angry to point you as a weapon towards their enemies, you're being manipulated. And that doesn't help anybody. And it definitely doesn't help you. So the mindfulness is the antidote. The true mindfulness, the awareness that one's emotions are being activated and being used against you or against others in particular. This should be that warning sign to become mindful and to redirect.
I think that the failure really wasn't so much Anakin's as it was the Jedi Council. And I think, so I'm going to use an example here. This is a water bottle. I swear I don't work for this company. But if we imagine that instead of a water bottle, that this was a soda bottle, right? Like some kind of a fizzy drink. And so if we shake it up and shake it up and shake it up and shake it up, what's going to happen? It's going to go boom, right? And that's what happened to Anakin. He was shaken up and shaken up and shaken up and was not given any appropriate outlet for his grief and anger. Have you ever had a day where you just felt like screaming into the void, but chances are the void was full? Yeah? Anyone? Yeah, me too, just like yesterday. And the truth is, I think what Anakin needed more than anything else is a safe space to process his horrendous grief. He needed a compassionate person. And what applied to most of the Jedi trainees, to the other kids, is that they didn't necessarily have the kind of trauma and loss that Anakin went through. Not only was he older, but he went through significant amount of trauma and needed support. And this is where Palpatine stepping in really used Anakin's vulnerability and the need for a compassionate figure, something Anakin really badly needed. And the truth is, as kids and as adults, when we're struggling, it is so much more helpful to have somebody sit in our corner and say, I don't even know what to say. I know that you're struggling and I'm here for you, right? Than to have somebody say, well, just don't feel this way. Let go. Why are you still sad? Stop being angry. Has that ever helped anyone? I'm genuinely asking. Yeah, me neither.
I'm just going to mention one last thing on this end. For those of us who've seen the Clone Wars animated series, I know, deep cut, there was this portion where Anakin gets to meet essentially the main archetypes of the light and the dark side, seeing some nodding heads. And he, for the most part, was somewhat allied with the light. Of course, he's a Jedi, but there was no action. There was no sense of agency. And so when anger feels powerful and mindful or wisdom feels weak, it's unfortunate that the powerful will just overcome the weak, who will be pacifistic and avoid damage or avoid harm, but to be able to stand up for what one believes in, to be able to be strong in one's convictions, but be mindful in to whom you're applying it, to defend against those who are, agents of just power for the sake of power, on behalf of those who are peaceful, but to be powerful for them. That nice balance should have been or could have been what the chosen one could have striven for, but unfortunately, the Sith got their hands on him.
So one other thing I want to ask you guys about trauma and grief is we all have gone through traumas and griefs in our lives. So speaking from, you don't have to go into too much detail, but what would you have liked to have had that you also wanted, Anakin to have and stuff like that? What do you think, if you were in Anakin's position, given your own experiences, how could Obi-Wan have provided you with the kind of support you needed? This is for all the panelists, so we're going to go down the line.
Sure. So when I was younger and may have gone through things that, one would call trauma, I turned to fiction. And I found the people whose lives I respected in fiction. I saw lives that I didn't see being lived out in my daily life. Now, whatever it was that drew me to the book, consume those characters, I have no idea what that was. That's something I would just say is me. Not everybody has that. So if you don't have that, then it's nice to have a mentor, someone around, who says, hey, check this out. Read it and we'll talk about it. And you don't have to push the issue, man, that's you there. You don't have to do that. You just talk about them. Talk about those characters. That person listens to you, and there's a lot of my therapy colleagues who will attest when they're telling that character story, they're kind of telling their own. So having people around who you can trust, and there is something to be said for being a bit agentic and seeking those people out. One of the issues is some people don't do that. Some people don't have that ability in them and need to even be coached to actually seek a mentor or seek help. So alternative lifestyles through others or through fiction is what I would recommend and what I did.
Yeah, great point. Actually, I very much relate to that. And for me, I think I grew up being a really awkward kid, and now I'm a really awkward adult. And so for me, I think I always felt really lonely and misunderstood. And I thought it was just me. I thought I was a freak of some kind. And then when I was 16, I saw the X-Men. And I was like, they're my people. And I was like, I want to be one of them. And so I think that what most of us need is just to know we're not alone, to know that what we're going through is okay and someone else has been through it too. I think that's what Anakin needed. And that's where I think in Star Wars Rebels, I don't want to spoil too much, so I'm just going to say there was a scene with Kanan and Ezra where they had a talk about feelings, and where Kanan, being in the mentor position, shared his own personal experience in order to support his trainee, in order to support Ezra. And I thought it was the most magical moment. And what I thought made it extra special too is that it was the first time that I've seen, in Star Wars universe anyway, two men on the screen talking about feelings and the importance of feeling feelings. And I thought that was a really beautiful scene.
As the person without a degree here, but nonetheless has had trauma, who in this room is familiar with imposter syndrome? Just raise your hand. So this is actually a pretty new concept that I learned recently. Someone is pointing directly at themselves, love that. Where you go through life, and as someone who's worked in a very high pressure job, this idea that we have where you're just supposed to show up somewhere and just say, I'm fine, everything's fine, it's all good, and whether that's grief or trauma or whatever, it makes me really sad that that's how we've become as a society. And watching Star Wars a lot, I personally relate very much like Princess Leia. Her entire planet gets destroyed, and it's, oh yeah, I'm sad. Someone falls over. Oh, there's a disturbance in the Force, and that's it. The voices have been silenced, and now we're done. We're not going to talk about it anymore. Okay. So I completely agree with what Dr. Scarlett said, that you need someone to say, hey, you're not alone. Maybe it's not the same exact journey, but I would venture to say that everyone in this room, if I went into detail about my personal trauma, that there would be a similar story. And if I only connected with one person here, it would make me feel less alone. So I think that that's the most important thing that Anakin needed to know.
Does anyone remember the name of the droid in The Mandalorian that told Mando, I am no man, I am no human, and therefore he could heal him, he could see his face? Does anyone remember the name? There we go, thank you. I knew there was an 80-something there, but didn't want to say it wrong. So here's the closest thing in Star Wars that we have to a healer figure. Yeah, there's Rey, and she uses the Force healing, but that's Rey. To some degree, there's Luke in the latest series, who basically just kind of tries to knock some sense into his nephew by telling him, everything you just said is wrong. Sometimes a good therapist will tell you. They'll call you out on it. Just the same way that IG-89 was able to tell Mando, you're allowed to accept help. If you need it to be from someone that doesn't look like you, that's okay. Sometimes in therapy, it's good to have someone that looks like you, that you have this kind of shared experience with. But the real thing that matters the most is just that goodness of fit. You search around, you interview, you swipe right or left on these therapists and find one that matches you, that gets you, that knows your fandom, and can make these metaphors nice. Then it's likely that you're going to feel they understand you and they can help you heal. That's why Star Trek has some counselors, and that's why it's better.
Well, to go on about wanting to have someone there with him and understand him and everything, Anakin's not the only one in his family who struggles with that. In the sequel trilogy, we see Ben, a good name for a character, I think. I'm not biased at all. I see in Ben actually a lot of myself, and not just because we share the same name, but Ben Solo, or Kylo Ren, as he chooses to be called, he wants to belong. He wants to know who he is and where does he fit in the universe, and how can his unique experiences and skills make a difference in the universe. Unfortunately, he didn't get a lot of that validation from his dad, Han Solo, if anyone was not familiar who his father was, or his mom, unfortunately. And I personally felt like that was really weird, because in the original trilogy, Leia's very empathetic. She understands what Luke is going through. And I just thought it was interesting that she wasn't able to see the same in her son. And that is probably one reason I think that Ben Solo was called to the dark, or at least thought the dark could help him, because, well, as we talked about, the expression of emotion is saying, yes, feel your feelings, be angry, that gives you power. Someone who's hurting and someone who's alone, they want that power, they want that control in their life. So this desire for belonging, I think, and loneliness is a really, really big one in all of Star Wars, but especially here with Kylo Ren, because throughout the entire trilogy, even towards the end, he's still alone in a lot of times, or at least in his own mind. So what does loneliness do to us, and how does that desire for belonging guide us in our choices and connections and the kind of groups of people that we hang out with?
So loneliness does not mean being physically alone in space. It means emotional loneliness, emotional disconnection. So I talk about loneliness as being unseen by somebody else, being unheard by other people, and being undervalued or devalued, right? So when we don't feel like we matter, when we don't feel like people understand what we're going through, even if we're in a room with hundreds of people, we're going to feel very much alone. And for Kylo Ren, that is very much what he was going through. He was having so many feelings and understandable frustration with nobody being willing to be in his corner. And the one person he really trusted, Luke, ended up, at least in Kylo's opinion, turning on him and being scared by Kylo's emotions. And so I imagine that felt like a really big betrayal. And so with loneliness, the way that it can impact us is that it impacts us not only psychologically, it affects us physiologically. So over the last 2 decades, researchers have found that feeling lonely, feeling chronically lonely, can increase our risk of heart disease, Alzheimer's disease in individuals who are prone to it, can make us more likely to get sick because it weakens our immune system, and can severely impact our mental health. So it can make us feel depressed, anxious, and can make us even consider ending our life. Now, the good news is that when we feel supported by other people, all of that reverses. Our immune health can actually become stronger. we can actually expand our life. How cool is that? We can expand our life when we feel understood and gotten by other people. So for example, by attending Comic-Con and talking about things that we're very passionate about, we're getting minutes, if not hours, extra added to our life. When we're talking to other people about our experiences and hearing theirs, we're expanding our life. So much so that researchers have found that after 5 years of having just once a week meaningful interaction with another people can expand our lifespan by several years. How amazing is that? Just once a week, having a meaningful interaction with somebody else. And so I think for so many of us, like Kylo, sometimes we might find ourselves feeling very lonely, but luckily, please know the cure is there. If we reach out to a friend or even a stranger online or in person, if we share our experience and if we feel seen and see somebody else's experience, that makes us stronger and therefore probably a much better Jedi, Sith, your choice.
So I think there's one word that we haven't talked about, which to me I thought of right away, was abandonment. And I think for most of us that have experienced trauma or grief, that is an incredibly prevalent feeling that, at least as someone who I think is in the healing process, that has never gone away. You always feel like, even if you, whether it's a romantic partner, a friend, a mentor, somebody that you trust, what is keeping this person from abandoning me? And I will tell you that has been the hardest thing to overcome, because again, with Kylo, he had parents. His parents weren't there for him. Luke abandoned him. So I would say that finding your tribe, I know, and it's so cliche to say that, but you can. And it's funny, now I'm at the point where I have a tribe, and it becomes a joke, but, oh, I know that when you say you're going to go on a trip, you're not going to come back. But it's true. I mean, it's coming to the point where you can accept it and you feel those feelings. So I think if, Kylo again had the ability to express himself, and they apologized and actually told him, we know that you feel abandoned, he probably wouldn't feel so lonely. And I think that's, as someone who's gone through trauma, that's the hardest thing, is that a lot of times don't get that closure, or people being able to admit that they made those mistakes.
Similarly speaking, it's important who we are spending our time with. Being alone compared to being with a negative influence, there is some detriment that can come from this. Mm-hmm. Being with someone, but you're just in a constant state of anger and frustration, that's going to release cortisol, and that's going to make it more deleterious. It literally, cortisol, the stress hormone, becomes caustic, becomes like destructive in our body if we keep it up for too much. That's why the Sith look like that. It's just weighing them away. So when we find the people that help us feel that sense of togetherness, whether it is a ragtag bunch of rebels or a bunch of genetic outcasts from a bad batch, when you're in agreement with each other, when you align on enough areas and you feel connected, this is fantastic. This is the group that you can connect with. This is the part that lets you recharge enough to go forth and maybe even confront those members of society, of family, or even those nasty friends from that bad batch, the worst part of the batch, that is toxic. And to establish those boundaries, to be okay with being without. And so when we can find the strength within ourselves to be okay with ourselves alone, to have some solitary time and actually get to know ourselves a bit, then we know that we don't need to chase after negative influences just because they happen to be willing to tolerate us, if not to manipulate us.
So how many of you have ever been in a conversation with someone who won't let you talk? All right. Now, here's how we know it's our turn. When I'm about to talk to you and I'm telling something, when I think I'm finished, the pitch of my voice starts to go down. And that's the cue for everyone else that they're going to get a turn on the floor. Now, do you know that consciously? Absolutely not. You know that in the structure of your brain because that's how you interact with people playing with toys when you're a kid. Kids between the ages of 18 and 30 months, if you put them in a room with twin sets of identical toys, they will spontaneously imitate each other, taking turns being the leader, taking turns being the follower. We call this play, but it's everything, because it's in that give and take, that resonance, that start, that stop, that taking the turn and changing. That's the foundation, not only for social interaction, but the foundation for learning. Data indicate that 9-months-old who have their caregiver holding them, when you point them to an object and use words, if you then have that kid look at images of objects, if their parent was holding them when they saw that object, their brain has a different response than if they were by themselves. So caregivers are doing so much more than we think they're doing. Trust is not something that comes through our genes. Trust comes through expectations and reciprocity. And we learn expectation and reciprocity by living with people and interacting with them. If you don't engage in reciprocity with human beings, you don't learn trust, right? And if you don't learn trust and you don't learn how to be with people, and things you do with people don't work, then something kicks in called learned helplessness. And it's not a cognitive thing. You don't sit around and think, oh, I'm not going to try because I can't do anything. Your brain actually reorganizes itself that you don't even try. Rats who are actually put in a situation where there's no correct outcome over and over, they go catatonically schizophrenic. You can pick them up and you can pull their tail and their legs won't do anything. Usually pick up a rat up and you pull its tail, it's going to kick and bite, scream, right? So helplessness, not being able to make things happen in the world, changes what you are. And so if you're that age and you don't have experience with trust and reciprocity, it's very, very difficult for these things to come to you unless you find someone who says, hey, let's sit down for a second, let's have a cup of coffee, right? And create that space of reciprocity. That reciprocity is something that has to happen for you to feel the phenomenon of trust.
So you guys talked about, sometimes toxic environments and maybe not a good group of people to hang out with. Well, in the Star Wars galaxy, there's not a good group of people, but a lot of times people who need structure find themselves in this group of people and they might end up doing some not so cool things. So I'm going to open this up to Scott, who has a lot to say about the Empire.
So we're going to flip through these slides quickly, but what I want to show you is how oppressors oppress. Oppressors oppress by changing the natural structure of the world that you live in. So nature without human involvement tends to be organized what we call fractally. What that means is that your cells are made of chemicals, the cells are made of, your blood is made of collections of cells, your heart is a larger scale phenomenon, and all of those different phenomena are nested within each other, and a healthy system is one in which all those different levels of scale get to influence the final outcome. Heart attacks happen when you have a large clump in an artery that actually has an over large effect on your blood, on your heart rate, and doesn't allow all those lower scale phenomena to influence your heart rate. So a healthy heart is actually pretty wild, because all the different scales are having an influence on how your heart rate works. So this is Andor, by the way. I don't think there are any spoilers here, but Andor totally rocks. I'm going to show you the visual structure of how oppressors deconstruct or reorganize the fractal nature of indigenous life. So you can see here you have young Andor looking out at this huge, this might well be the inverse of a Wanda bubble, right? This is what's inside the Wanda bubble. This is a huge scar put in his homeland by resources that are going to be extracted that we'll see in a later slide are used to build these obnoxiously large empire-type buildings. So you can see that Endor lives in a fractal land, right? All the different scales of reality get to express themselves in daily life, including the population. Go ahead. And then you can see now the invasion of this fractal heaven, if you like, by these very obnoxiously large empire-type devices, i.e. a spaceship. And then this is Andor walking into this is Alice in Wonderland for Star Wars, right? This is Andor walking into the rabbit's hole of Alice in Wonderland. And you can see, it's just a beautiful image. Behind him is the fractal reality he's leaving. He's working into this very simple, geometrically simple world. And then this is where we see him later when he finds out he's a rebel. He's a rebel, he's learning how to be a rebel back in the world of fractal nature. And then this is how people try dress when they work for the Empire. Notice that their dress is not fractal. Their dress is this huge shape, and you have no sense in this fashion. Yeah, they have no fashion sense, by the way. You have no shape in the fashion that the threads matter. This could be made of anything. There's nothing lower level scale that gets to have an impact on how this looks. This is what oppression is. Large scale, simple phenomenon that block out or obliterate the influence of all the different levels of scale. And this is how you have to dress if you're a rebel in that world. You have to dress in fractal shades of gray so that you can actually hide. And this is the indigenous culture. What you can see is just living in that fractal reality, expressing that fractal reality in their clothing. There's nothing oppressive about this clothing. I hope that makes sense. Go ahead to the next one. Now, this is what it's like to live in an Empire workstation, right? This is nothing but brute simplicity. The individual is irrelevant. They exist in this square that is no different from any other square. There's absolutely nothing fractal here. And this is upper middle class life in the Empire. I don't know. And you can see this nice tension between a little bit of fractal natural structure in their clothes and the sort of square design of the apartment. And then as you get a little more bourgeois, you get to do the same thing, but you get to use finer materials, et cetera. And then this is what their Senate looks like. This is what their negotiations look like. These big, bland spaces that strip away the fundamental nature of fractal nature. And then this is where they're prisoners. Everything is stripped away so that you can, of course, be observed. Completely observed all the time. And this is where these people of power make their decisions to simplify the world of everyone else and put them in power. So I just want to share with you that when you see a world starting to look like that, you're probably in the presence of an oppressor. Right.
So we have just a couple of minutes left, and I want us to kind of end with maybe final thoughts, and then where can people find you on the interwebs? If you want to share your interwebs identity stuff. Starting from Isaac, and we'll work our way back down to me.
So thank you very much, everybody, for coming. My final thoughts on this one are that the beginnings of all these systems begin with the individual, and the next best thing, or the next closest thing, are the friends and the family. As you find yourself interacting with those around you, you get to choose who are those people, how do you engage with them. So by choosing to be mindful, by choosing to cultivate the kind of life that you want and the behaviors that you like to see in your friends and your family, by praising that up, complimenting that up. There's a whole therapy approach that I use, which is literally called parent-child interaction therapy. So getting the parent-child dyad to actually interact and promote the kind of behavior we like to see, you get to strip away the bit of that brute, oppressive approach, the authoritarian parent figure telling you must do as I command, and instead an authoritative one that is natural, that is understanding, and that explains and cultivates the kind of livelihood that we like to see in each other. If you'd like to stay in touch, ask more questions, you can find me at allmindhealth.com, ALLMINDHEALTH. I also have some business cards as well, if you'd like.
It's really unfair to follow that up. I was not on a panel. I attended a panel earlier where we talked about getting through grief and trauma and how you can't go back to the person that you were. And I had this thought while we're sitting here on this panel that, which I hope all of you take today, and that I really took to heart today, was that it's not about like going back to who you were. It's about becoming who you are. And I think that the characters that we've talked about today wanted to go back to who they were. Anakin wanted to go back to the little boy with his mother. Kylo Ren, same thing, wanted to go back to being with his parents and being trained under Luke. And I think we spent a lot of time focusing on trying to get back things that we had previously, when in fact, it may be scary because it's brand new, but it's exciting to know that there is a new part of us that can exist and get through those hard times. So anyway, that's all that I had to say, and I don't have any professional social media, but if anyone wants to stay after and chat, feel free to talk to me.
I wanted to say that so often we turn to movies and books and television shows because they remind us of something that characters have to offer, a way that characters help others. And I wanted to say that each and every one of you has already made more of an impact in your life than you'll probably ever realize. There might be people out there who are alive because of you, because of your kindness, because of your support, and they might never think to tell you. And so from the bottom of my heart, I just wanted to thank you for all your kindness. And no matter what is going on in your life, please know you always have choices, you always have control, and you always have the ability to make a difference. Thank you. Yes, I'm on social media. If you just look for Janina Scarlett, just about anywhere, you could find me.
So the Force is a continuum. You're about everything, everything's about you. That's another way to say what you just said. And you are going to have to focus. And what our culture does is emphasize the focusing, and it doesn't emphasize the relaxing. That's what you're going to have to learn to do. My colleagues have called it mindfulness, but it's to let the constraints go and to let your mind go where it goes so you can be part of bigger things and be sensitive to things other than what you're focusing on. You can find me on YouTube at what's called Dark Loops Productions. I record panels with friends like these, and I post them on YouTube, and we have a lot of fun talking about all things pop culture. So, thank you.
So I'd just like to thank you all for coming. I hope that you can all find your own path through the Force and, understand your own place, whether you want to be a Jedi or a Sith, or if you want to be something in between. That's all cool. You can find me through my podcast, Mental Health Quest, on Facebook and Twitter, and listen to it wherever podcasts are found. And thank you all for coming. We kind of went a little bit over time, so until they... Oh, she's going to kick us out
Coming right now.
Yeah, so I'm sorry we didn't have time for questions, but if you want to ask questions outside, that's all good. Thank you.
Well done, man.